Thanks. I'm going to talk over this documentation, which is of a performance I did in June at the Institute of Contemporary Art in London. And if you get me very drunk later, I'll sing some of the songs live. But for now, you can see me up there. The documentation is exactly 10 minutes. So when the documentation stops, I will stop. How do we enact the histories of technology and media? What are the artistic research methods which help us engage with the past? And what resources does Feminist STS offer us as artists, and then back into STS through artistic research? One of the resources that's being used, mobilized within queer and feminist art at the moment is the idea of temporal drag. Now, for those of you who are familiar with theories of conventional drag, you can make the equivalences quite simply. Whereas traditional drag uses the excesses of gender with which to perform, temporal drag uses the excesses of time. So I've been interested in these excesses of time, their embarrassments, the sentimentalities, the nostalgias in which to perform and engage my interest in technologies and media. So I'm putting myself in alliances with artists such as Paul, I'm just going to, turn the volume off, it's distracting me. Pauline Boudry and Renati Lorenz, of Sharon Hayes and her use of voice and reenactment of slogans of the 80s. And are other artists who are using both reenactment, archival sources, and an increasing interest, I think, in certain artistic moving image circles of narration and where the human voice and indeed the technologized voice fits into these ideas of what the moving image can do. So using these techniques, I draw also on feminist science and technology studies, and in particular, the kind of feminist science and technology studies that has interest in excess and non-utilitarian approaches. And here I'm thinking about authors such as Zoe Sophia, who has a critique of the use value of STS, of sometimes its concern with practicality and strategy. And I'm interested, I guess, in doing an STS which also, not to the exclusion of strategic or pragmatic aims, but also allows desire and affects. So here you see the link with my interest in temporal drag of embarrassment, ambivalence, and sometimes sentimentality. If we look at STS like this back through into how it might affect artistic research, we might think of a heritage that includes people like Susan Lee Starr, whose poetry and poetic and romantic sometimes engagements with the field suggests the possibility and importance of engaging, embarrassing others. So to read poetry at an STS conference, I think does make some people uncomfortable, and rightly so. So this, in a way, counters the idea of a traditional science and technology studies that emphasizes sometimes quite a worthy idea of the public understanding of science, but it also critiques perhaps a cooler STS in the art and design field, which may collapse perhaps, and this is my provocation, into some kind of rather heroic schoolboy conceptualism of trying just to kind of do the artistic move within STS, but maintaining a certain idea of a heroism. I'm more interested, as you can perhaps see in the performances, is some kind of idea of improvised speech and invoking past media through a vulnerable combination of singing and shouting. And here I want to theoretically think about the work that I've done in part with Celia Lurie about the idea of inventiveness and inventive methods. And the proposition here is that when an inventive method is addressed to a problem, a social problem, an artistic problem, neither the method nor that problem remain unchanged. And the inventiveness is in that moment of addressing it, addressing the problem with the inventive method without quite knowing what is going to emerge out of both. So here you're seeing a performance at the Institute of Contemporary Art, where I perform a set of songs and speeches about Cold War technologies, particularly around ideas of nuclear armament, use it over a piece of 16mm footage, which is produced from single frame animation of flowers that are taken from a protest camp in the 80s called Greenham Common, which was a women-only protest camp against American nuclear missiles being put on British soil. And you'll see in the documentation the way that I tried to both animate flowers rather than technology, but what you won't hear is the fact that my speech and my singing are battling with another kind of technology that has resonances with the Cold War, and that is the noise and gadgetry and mechanics of a 16mm projector. So here I am shouting and singing over that kind of technology. What proposals does this have back to artistic research? I think that was one of the proposals that were made today, was how could we think about artistic research and STS, and I also want to think about feminism being embedded in that. Many art practitioners, I think, have a certain respect or sometimes fetishization of sociological methods, and I think this may be a problem. One approach is to think that methods are not inventive, and if you just know a bit more about ethnography, or if you just could do a slightly better interview, your art would also be better. I'm not sure this is a very safe way to think about the production of artistic research, and I really think we need to discuss it, partly because that kind of attitude is being imposed into certain kinds of institutions and funding mechanisms for art, and I think that's dangerous for art. So I think that artists need to be less masochistic about their relationship to other kinds of knowledges. And I think that we at least need to begin with an idea of inventiveness where things are transformed as we do our artistic research. And as you'll see, I also think that we need to develop new songs for STS and shouts and appeals and think about the role of the voice. And this would be my starting point, although it does actually include a trumpet as well, as you might have seen in there. In this piece, I used many different kinds of songs, including marching songs. And the idea of affective enrollment, I think, could be a good starting point for us to think about the connections of artistic research and STS. What does it mean to recruit new people in this hybrid field and not necessarily to worry about the purification of keeping art, design and STS separate? And I'll just let me finish up there, and then I've finished. So here I'm singing 4 minutes to midnight, 4 minutes to Armageddon, 4 minutes before we die, 4 minutes to say goodbye. Why didn't we shout? Why didn't we cry? Why didn't we call deterrence a lie? Now they're underground, they don't have to see the eyes of the dying. These are songs from Greenham Common Women's Peace Camp. 3 minutes to midnight. 2 minutes to Armageddon. 2 minutes to say goodbye. Why didn't we shout? Why didn't we cry? Why didn't we call deterrence a lie? Now they're underground and they don't have to see the eyes of the dying. 1 minute to midnight. 1 minute to Armageddon. 1 minute before we die. 1 minute to say. Thanks very much.